Hi, and welcome to the May edition of our show. I'm Amanda, co-founder of Cinetopia. Paul Bruce couldn't be here today, and we're back at the studios of EHFM, all feeling a little bit of FOMO for not being invited yet to the live stream from Cannes. I'm here with Jim Ross, managing editor of Take One magazine. And hi.
Wasn't sure if I was meant to say hello or not, but I am here. Let's not pretend.
I'm also here with another regular, Anni Asikainen.
Yeah. Hi, that was well done, Amanda.
And a new addition in this episode, Luka Vukos, part of our Cinetopia core team.
Pleasure.
Okay, so apart from getting rained on, what have we all been up to?
Well, I mean, watching the films for the show mainly.
Lots of films.
Yeah, trying to fit them in. We've got a few students going to the Cannes Film Festival, so I'm hoping to hear a little bit about some of the films that are going on there, and then eventually see them when they turn up in cinemas, maybe perhaps in September or something like that. But yeah, getting a few of them and some of the short films that are playing there as well, so I'll be having a wee look at them.
That's amazing. Annie, what have you been up to?
Well, I went to see John Wick 3 without seeing John Wick 1 or John Wick 2, and it was a bit like an experience of watching Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 5 without watching Game of Thrones previously, so I was like, why is this all this senseless violence happening on screen, and like, what's the story with all the animals?
I haven't seen any of them, but am I right in saying that the sequels are meant to take place like hours after the first one?
Yeah, like instantly, so
right,
they like run into each other. Yeah.
Okay.
I was really lost for the first 20 minutes of the film, and then the rest of the film I was just incredibly bored.
Okay, and Luca, I hear you're moving to Leith at some point.
Yeah, so just got the keys on Wednesday. And it will be over the course of 2 weeks. That will be in Leith in the sunshine and the rain.
That's exciting. So you can help us out a little bit when we plan another cinema on the shore.
Absolutely. Also working on an article for an interview that I did with Scottish actor Jamie Robson about the British Weird Wave. So that should be out sometime this week, just before the cameo screening of My Loneliness Is Killing Me.
Oh, cool. Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you guys check on our website about that, and it'll link to the cameo screening that he mentioned. So, as is customary on this show, Cinetopia has its networking event last month, and we always announce the winners of the raffle on this podcast. That event feels like ages ago. And it probably has been in our term. We've done a lot of this stuff since then. As usual, we have a great turnout at Brewdog. It's a great way to get to meet film people, talk filmmaking in Edinburgh. I met a really interesting DP who just finished shooting Idris Elba's new comedy show In the Long Run, I think the second series. I didn't even know about that show, but I'll definitely check it out. But anyway, we run a raffle with business cards every time, and I know everyone who put one in is probably waiting impatiently to see whether they won this time round. So now's the time to reveal the winner. Who's going to do it for us, Annie?
I think since Luca is new and fresh, he's going to have to pull the card out of my hat. So just a second. There we go. Drum roll.
Okay.
Ding.
And the winner is Terry Dre.
Whoa, Terry Dre. Yes, everybody. Whoa. I actually saw our last winner, Heather Brown, posted on Instagram her Cinetopia dope bag and winnings. And I have to say myself, it looked pretty awesome. Milk duds, Juju Fruits, Jiffy Pop popcorn. We asked her what her favorite bit was, and she said by far the popcorn. So I was quite happy about that. I'm sad to say we've run out of American candy supply. We'll have to bring some more back on from my next trip overseas. But our next winner will be getting the celebrated popcorn, Jiffy Pop popcorn, and we'll be adding some UK movie candy treats. Does anyone have any recommendations for me to buy?
I get the feeling that America does a far better line in novelty candies
than
the UK, and probably even Scotland in particular. Go and get like, I don't know, the rhubarb and custard things or something. Go like properly old school.
Yeah.
Things that come in glass jars or something.
Yeah.
And are sold by grandmothers.
Well, I also heard that back in the day here, it was really ice cream that was like a big thing at the cinemas. So like an older generation would get ice cream at the cinema and not popcorn, when we think of it.
Yeah, it's funny. You can actually see that at the theatre still, because if you go to the theatre, then basically the only thing that they seem to sell in the actual theatre space are these like teeny tiny things of ice cream. I reckon it would probably melt by the time you're got that though. So I'd go for something more solid.
Well, I have to say it's not the same as a Junior Mint or Milk Duds. So next time, guys. But you'll really enjoy your tote bag, Terry, and we'll email you for details on how to get that. So, Annie, what's in store for our next networking event in Edinburgh?
So we're planning on doing something slightly different. So we're doing a masterclass and having an event afterwards as a networking event. And a masterclass is going to be post-production for producers. It's going to feature 3 or 4 panel members to talk about what it entails in post-production and how producers should or could kind of budget and do timetables better in regard to that. But keep an eye on our website and our social media. We'll be announcing the date for that event soon.
Great. Thanks so much. So in this episode, we'll be reviewing a few films, starting with Beats, a new Scottish film directed by Brian Welsh, Claire Denis' own space odyssey, and her much-anticipated first English-language film, High Life, starring Juliette Binoche and Robert Pattinson, and also Josephine Decker's Madeline's Madeline, which is currently in theaters, and actually you can find it on Mubi as well to stream. We also are sitting down with the team behind CinemaAttic, Alberto Valverde and Rafael Cueto, Edinburgh-based film collective that has been around for almost a decade and focuses on Spanish and Ibero-American cinema. So first up is our review of Beats. The film was actually executively produced by Steven Soderbergh. It was directed by Brian Welsh and written by Kieran Hurley. It was originally a play by Kieran Hurley. Beats is a story of 2 teenage boys during the summer of 1994 who finally experience a rave night at the end of an era, taking place in a small town in central Scotland, somewhere in Midlothian, they say. The film is about 2 friends, Jono, who's played by Christian Ortega, and Spanner, who's played by Lorne MacDonald. They share a love of music that was so popular in raves across the UK, and they spend the last few months together hanging out, partying, and finally going to their first one. It's definitely a coming-of-age film, a film I think that captures a time and place in an end of an era. It's also right at when the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act was passed, which, as it's very clear in the trailer and in the film, which outlawed public gatherings wholly and predominantly characterized by the emission of succession of repetitive beats. And in the film, the 4x3 TV shows show Tony Blair and the new Labour Party coming in, promising a new, exciting future, which I think we all know didn't quite happen the way we wanted it to. The one thing that makes this very distinctive, I think, is it's shot entirely in black and white, except this one scene when the rave is happening and everyone's doing drugs. It also, I think I read it took inspiration of some of like Shane Meadows' This Is England, and I think that's maybe why I really enjoyed it. I've seen it twice now, and I thought it was cute. It was lovely. It was a great story about 2 friends. It kind of gave you a sense of a period of time, and I quite enjoyed it. How about you guys?
I would agree with that. And I say this as somebody who has not really listened to rave music really at any point in my life. I mean, I can appreciate a good tune, but it's not a scene I've ever been plugged into or anything like that. But I think what the film does very well, and you've mentioned it there, I think there's kind of 2 main strands to it. The first one is the fact that it's just really an examination of that central friendship between Johnny and Jono and Spanner. And it does that very well. I think the 2 actors, Christian Ortega and Lorne MacDonald, are very good in the roles. I think Lorne MacDonald is hilarious, in fact. I think he's really, really good and gets quite a lot of the best moments in that. So it does that very well from a character standpoint. But then also, I think with the setting of the time and place, I think it actually says a little bit about Scotland itself, and even the way they present the differing home lives of the central characters. And it makes quite a good, maybe we'll talk about this more, I don't want to go on about it too much at the moment, it actually makes quite an interesting comparison, I think, with Trainspotting, which is also one of these films, purely because the film, at least, of Trainspotting is set around a similar time. And just the way it finishes on the film kind of finishes on a bittersweet note. I wouldn't say it's an uplifting ending, but it's certainly not a particularly pessimistic one. But it does have a much more optimistic, inclusive outlook, I would say, compared to something like Trainspotting. So I think it's actually got quite a lot going on under the hood. It's a very enjoyable film on a surface level. The actors are good. It's funny. If you like the music, then obviously you're going to get stuff out of that. I think the supporting cast are all really good as well. But I think when you start to look at it through that prism, it does actually have a lot to say. And I think one of the key things there is what you highlighted, is it spends a lot of time lingering on Tony Blair on televisions, and that is very much not on accident.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say a few words and let Luca say more because he looks like he's got a lot to say. But I wasn't a huge fan of the film. I'm same as Jim. I was never into that kind of rave scene. Like, I've gone to raves, but the whole drug taking is kind of a new thing to me because I'm a little puss. But, like, it wasn't as nice that I was hoping it to be. It's very nostalgic. It doesn't really have anything modern or contemporary much to say. I like the friendship aspect of it. So as a coming of age story, I think it was good, and I loved the part with the brother, because the brother's being very violent and stuff. And, like, I think I'd love to talk to Luca. It's not because he was violent that I liked it. I talked to Luca yesterday about it, and I was same as Luca. So I hoped he would come back into the film, and we kind of discussed that relationship a bit more, but we didn't. And what I didn't like about it is it had these kind of very stereotypical characters and events, and similar to the succession of repetitive beats, it had a predictable series of events as well. So I wasn't surprised at any point. I just kind of knew what's going to happen at all times. But Luca, what did you think about it?
I completely agree with Annie. I think it's like the film was trying to hit the beats of a coming-of-age drama.
Hey!
Thank you. But I thought, particularly the main rave sequence just did not, talking to Amanda about this yesterday, I don't think it matched the passion or the aggression of that opening scene where they're in the bedroom by themselves and sort of like going at it. I thought like it was a lengthy sequence, that rave sequence, but I just like, not to bring him up, but it's like it just wasn't as aggressive as a Gaspar Noé rave sequence.
Yeah, but I actually read something about how how they filmed that, and they had to get a massive amount of people in to do the filming, and the amount of energy that they put into it, putting everybody in 90s gear and stuff. And a lot of people who had been, I don't think any of us can say, maybe Jim one time had been to, a rave in Scotland. We can't really speak to that, the four of us,
But my point though is, watching that sequence, I was thinking about, okay, sort of like what Annie was saying, it's like, when is Fido going to come back in? And then there are shots of like, the, is it the Ravenscraig plan?
Yeah.
Of that falling down, and then there's, cutaways of what Laura McDonald's character is thinking about, which is, thinking about his best friend and stuff like that. And I just wanted just a clean bang, bang of that thing. But it was, yeah.
You see, the funny thing, the film. Now, I like the film a great deal, but what I will say is it's definitely not perfect. And I think the point with Fido, you have hit upon something there, because Fido is the brother of Spanner in the film, and basically Spanner clearly does not have a very good home life, right? His brother's also involved in criminal activities, very abusive towards Spanner, and they contrast that against the home life of Jono, who has a much more kind of like aspirational family. Like they're looking to move to this kind of fairly anonymous looking new build house, like quite far away from Spanner, who they consider an issue and all the rest of it. And I'll return to that in a minute, but I think Fido's role, really, as far as I'm concerned, should have been confined to that. It provides that contrast. It kind of shows different aspects of the boys' home lives, which I think you can extrapolate to Scotland in a wider sense, and I'll come back to that. But really what he ended up getting used for, Fido that is to introduce peril to this this central rave scene, and I don't think it really needed it. Now, because one of the other characters is Jono's stepfather, who is a police officer in the local police force, and obviously he's responsible for enforcing this, the Public Order and Criminal Justice Act, which is effectively outlawing raves. So I think it had that peril aspect anyway, and it had that in a fairly, with a certain amount of dramatic irony.
Right.
So I think that I despite the fact I like the film, I do agree with the pair of you on that. That's one part that I wasn't that keen on. What I will say though is that central rave sequence, I think, cements a lot of what the film I think is maybe looking at under the surface. It's no coincidence that basically some of the images reflect the way Scottish industry is changing. That's kind of what's in there, and it's in colour. It's not in black and white, that part. And also the fact that basically the two boys both have abuse in their homes. One comes from their family, the other one comes from, sure, it's his stepfather, but it's a police officer, it's an institutional force. And I'm going to disagree with the idea that there's not really a contemporary angle, because it's very deliberate. It's very deliberate that it finishes on saying that bill was passed in the UK Parliament and was unopposed by both major parties. It makes a big deal of that. And I think what it allows it to say beyond that central friendship, and the way it focuses on that by doing things like the imagery during the rave, what it chooses to focus on, the coda, and that contrasting home life of the boys, I think it's actually got quite a lot going on. Isn't to say it's perfect by any means. As I say, I think Fido was poorly used at the conclusion. I think the race scene does go on too long. I think it serves an important purpose, but it does go on too long. But really, just getting drawn in by those central performances and then trying to get something else out of it as well, like, lingering on Tony Blair saying, we need to build a nation with pride in itself. And at that point in Scotland's history, I really don't think it had that. So it is kind of making that comment about what has changed and where do we go from here, because when you then look at how the friendship develops in the film's coda, there's a bit of that as well. So I think it's got plenty going on, but it's not perfect. I'm not going to, it's not the hill I'm going to die on, but I do think it's got quite a lot going on.
See, I didn't think the rave scene went on too long, but maybe again it's that I liked the music and I enjoyed sort of the imagery and the way it was shot, and that aspect I like that. The other thing is, this is almost a first film coming out of, there's a couple feature films he did quite before this, but for the caliber and the product that I feel like that came out of this, and something that I think will linger in time and we'll look at more as one of these films about a certain time and a place, I think it'll stand up. That's my personal opinion. But anyone else?
I would agree with Jim and what you just said as well. We talked about this before, but the shots of the quite overt shots of the real estate sign in front of the house when they're moving to the new house. This whole, I think, is all of that stuff is super topical in today's contemporary Scottish.
How?
Well, in terms of gentrification, in terms of basically, and even just
There's
the way
new builds going up right next to, all over.
Yeah,
So-
but I think what kind of bothers me with that is it's still saying it in the very much in the context of nostalgia. So this happened. This was a particular time and place. I don't it's just my personal opinion. It doesn't really stretch far enough. That's been happening since. It's not nothing new or something super topical. It's just something that's been going on for a while.
Then it is contemporary. That's what you're saying. If it's happening since, it is contemporary.
Well, it's been then contemporary since that. You know what I mean? It's not saying anything that's particularly new. Oh, it's been dealt with before.
I feel like in terms of... So the film is very much evoking a time and place, and that's clear, but it is also very much a product of the here and now, and I don't think it's necessarily looking to show what's happening. It's perhaps asking where we go from here, right? Because the setting of the film, and this goes for Trainspotting as well, actually. I know I keep coming back to it, but when I make this point, you'll see why. it's very much a product of where Scotland was at the time, right? So this is pre-devolution. It's pre-devolution referendum even really being proposed. The last one, back decades before then. So it's before then. It's before the independence movement kind of really got any traction and everything like that. And it's a Britain in the fag end of a Tory rule, which was extremely damaging to Scotland. And if you look at the way that is presented in Trainspotting, right, nobody really does anything about it. They slink back to Leith rather meekly and seek escape in Anita, whereas here there is at least some sort of there's a shared community, there's a shared identity. Now, Beats chooses to centre it around the rave scene, and that's just you get good music that comes with it and all the rest of it, but there is this idea of shared identity, shared community, and that's what Jono and Spanner, who have very different futures ahead of them, share. So it's kind of asking us to consider what is it that we share. Whereas if you look at Trainspotting, there's the very famous line there is, "There's no such thing as society, and even if there was, I wouldn't be a part of it." Right? So it's very different to that in the sense that you've got this institutional response, which is very, heavy-handed, and, politicians are all the same. That's kind of a message running through it. But it's trying to maybe get across, or at least this is what I got from it, that the response of the people is now different. So, yes, we are in a very similar situation, and it doesn't look to answer where do we go from here. But in that respect, whilst it's not a happy ending, it's quite bittersweet. It is far more optimistic than a lot of the films that were made about Scotland in that time otherwise would be. And that's why it's a product of the here and now, even if it's depicting the past.
So you think it's asking a question of what is the rave scene of today, and what is going to bring us together to fight, like, as a generation, fight against oppression, kind of thing?
I sort of still go back to this coming of age thing for me, because I think it's about these two people within their community, and it does harken to me, not just about Trainspotting. It reminds me of Dazed and Confused. What was that summer like, when in the 70s? What was that summer like in the 90s? And that whole reason, the new build versus the where he lived before, was about how that separated a friendship. And then eventually, as the end, they really do focus on the different characters and where they moved to, and where, none of them stayed in touch. It was that rave that brought them all together, and they'll have that moment. And so I still think it comes back to those characters as much as it creates this ethos of politics and Scotland around it. That's where I think it's successful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say the most successful part of the film is that central relationship. And you're 100% right. It is totally about that. It's just these little embellishments about, Jono moving to a new build versus the Maltese that he lives opposite. Spanner, the institutional response to this rave scene, some of the characters in that rave scene, and and of course Tony Blair being on the television at least 2 or 3 times in the film. They're not by accident, right? No. So I think it is trying to say, I think this film has more layers to it than I think it's really been given. Because a lot of the marketing, quite understandably, focuses on the music and the rave scene. That's an easy selling point, and it does do that very well. But I do actually think it's got a lot more going under the hood than it's maybe its own marketing, perhaps, is giving it credit for.
Okay, so the next film we're going to review is Claire Denis' High Life. And Jim, tell us a little bit about that film.
So, High Life. So, directed by Claire Denis, as you just said, and it's her first English language film. And it is a sci-fi. I think you could make a case for it having maybe elements of horror in there as well in some regards. But it's definitely mainly a sci-fi, and a lot of its reference points are sci-fi. And basically, the film opens on Robert Pattinson aboard a spacecraft, basically, and it's just him and a young child. And what proceeds to happen is we kind of jump back and forth in time, and we find out that he was part of a crew of basically death row prisoners who have been sent on an experimental mission to see if they can harvest energy from black holes. So we cut back and forth, we see what happens to the other members of the crew, we see his current situation, if we call that time period the present, if you like. And then we also see flashes forward past that to the future, and we see all their interactions, what happened to the various other crewmates, and what activities they engaged in while they were there. And I'm sure we're going to have plenty of discussion about that in a minute. So it's a very conceptual film. I don't think it's necessarily got. There is definitely a narrative there, but that's really just a very scant framework for it to hang quite a lot of ideas on, or depending on your viewpoint, no ideas at all. We'll get to that. But that's basically the crux of it, and for most of it we are with Robert Pattinson. There's also, I would say, the most prominent character beyond that is Juliette Binoche as a doctor called Dibbs, who is also one of the prisoners, but she just happens to be slightly more scientifically qualified than the rest of them, and her attempts to create a baby on board, effectively, and that's kind of her main focus. And we see them going about their business and all the rest of it. And I'll let somebody else say what they got out of it, because I think this is one of these films where people are going to say various different things that they got out of it, or did not, as the case may be.
I effing love this film. I thought it was, of recent memory, one of the most startling sci-fi films I've seen in a while. As a Tarkovsky fan, that there's so much copy and pasted into this, but in a good way. And everything from the different formats they were using, everything from digital to 16mm for the flashback sequences, and even the weird CCTV stuff that they use in certain bits where they're training on board and stuff like that. Yeah, and the ideas, as per any great sci-fi. Whether it's what does it mean to actually harvest new beings in space? What does it mean to actually send people off and then not care about them anymore? Basically prisoners in space. And then the sort of cliched idea, I'll admit, of as you approach a black hole, it's really you're approaching the black hole of your own self.
I don't love sci-fi films. They're not some of my favorite, but I love Claire Denis, and I love this film. I think almost even we were talking about with Beats, it created this atmosphere in a completely different way, where I was completely immersed in it, and I was completely wondering what was going to happen next with this group of people we were following along with a spaceship, and what was up with the dogs and the other spaceship and things like that. So many questions going on, but if you can consistently stay in that and not be pulled out, this is unrealistic. It shows it's a phenomenal film, but the soundtrack and the beauty of the film and the acting, Robert Pattinson, and I'm a huge fan of Juliette Binoche. It blew me away too.
I think as well, I really think there's some really original imagery as well that I did not expect to see in any film regarding Mia Goth, and basically there's an amazing shot of the astronauts almost dancing weightlessly as they're dropped off at the beginning. It's yeah. Annie.
So the part I liked about the film was the relationship between the father and the daughter, because it kind of it's an interesting premise. So this kid who's born in space has never been to Earth, but is born of Earthlings, and has been brought up by archive footage of Earth, I think, on how she sees the world, or the non-world, so the space around her. That I would have liked to kind of see that a bit more, but then there's a lot of other stuff, and then like Amanda said, that you require kind of that immersion into the story, which I just never got. I think the main instigator is Robert Pattinson, whose face I just can't stand, so it distances me already from the film. Any film he's in, I just don't like. And then the second part of it is just the premise is really odd. So I know it's stupid to cling on to things, but just if these people are death row inmates, who's left in the Earth? Because they're definitely not death row inmates, and the only reason they are made to be death row inmates is so they will have a reason to go on an eternity flight to a black hole, because otherwise nobody else would go on that ride. Like if you're a normal prisoner because of something you've done, you would just like rather sit at Earth and just like sit through your your prison stint. But like it's just a weird premise. And then there's a lot of things. So I looked up online to see if I was the only one who didn't like it, and looks like 57% didn't. So I have a bit of confidence in saying this. And one of the best ones I saw online was someone saying it's a collection of things you wish you could unsee, and there's plenty of that. So and it's just a bit weird. There's a lot of like sex stuff. There's a lot of rape, and I'm not sure if I like the way they are handling rape. So there's a violent rape scene. Again, spoilers. I'm always the one giving spoilers. There's a violent rape scene, and then there's like a female rape scene that is handled very differently, and that kind of woke me up a bit. Like, is this how we should be handling an issue like this? But again, I'm being a bit too picky on things. I just couldn't get that immersion, and I thought it was a bit silly, but not even silly, just a bit messy and weird, and intentionally trying to be a bit too smart.
So, on the spoilers thing, I think when the spoilers include a giant dildo, I think it's perfectly okay to flag that up in advance. I think that's the sort of thing that somebody should probably know about before they go into this film.
Yeah, don't bring your kids into this either.
Yeah, or older relatives, or, just be aware. Be aware. What I will say is part of what I liked about the film, and it's interesting that Luka, you saying original imagery, because I do agree with that. But one of the things I was wanting to talk about is Amanda saying that you don't really maybe gel with sci-fi a lot, and I think maybe one of the differences is this, and I think what's original about it is it does make use of some quite well established sci-fi imagery. Like it's got a very Solaris feel to it as they're walking around the ship. It's got I got a very strong silent running vibe off it, because there's kind of the central garden that they tend to, and it's kind of this oasis of green in the middle of this ship, and it very clearly evoked that for me. But then there's just all these other different bits in terms of kind of like, strong kind of monochrome lighting and all the rest of it, which kind of evokes sci-fi films we know about, right? And even when you get to the part where they are at the black hole, I mean, even recent films such as Interstellar, it kind of recalls that. But it's doing something very different, right? Because a lot of sci-fi films go the whole, what does it mean to be human route, right? I mean, like good ones do it, terrible ones do it, like some do it in block, but like Prometheus tried to do that pretty terribly in my opinion, but it did try to do it. But it is a little bit what Luka said of, as you're approaching the black hole, it's kind of like literal and metaphorical. And the reason she seems to jump back and forth is it seems to be not really asking what is it to be human. It's kind of like, what is it to be human when there is nothing else, right? What kind of behaviors do people regress to? How do they interact? What is it that's driving them, and all the rest of it? And it's using kind of the language of sci-fi to say that, but it's got a completely different, the analogy is it's got a completely different speech pattern to a lot of other, particularly recent sci-fi. So in that regard, I find it really, really quite interesting there. And it's funny that Annie mentioned the archive footage that the daughters brought up on, because it was kind of an unexpected appearance for Scotland and Murrayfield in that segment, I know, which I was not expecting when I watched it. I wasn't expecting Flower of Scotland. Yeah, I wasn't expecting Flower of Scotland to pop up in the middle of this film, to be honest. But it does. So there you go, Edinburgh. Go see it for that reason.
I think as well, at least since we're talking about this after Beats, I think, Amanda, I think you're right. I think atmosphere is a big part of all the films we're talking about today. But I think it's a great case of a sci-fi that's trying to do something new by sort of what you're saying, which is like taking tropes that currently exist, but in just imbuing it with characters that are so rich in texture. Like, this idea that Jules Binoche is trying to create a baby in space after she's done something to her own family that has caused her to be on this prison ship. And there's a dog sequence which directly pertains to Robert Pattinson's backstory. And yeah, as per the black hole thing, it's like it's a film that is cerebral, but it's like, okay, it's like if there's only humans left, kind of have to talk about them. You know, we can't go into, even though like they did consult people to create the imagery of the black hole. It's like we're not going to be going into 2001 level scientific detail of like what are we actually doing here. It's like, no, we're talking about a father and a daughter in space.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly really, for me and Luca and Jim, a bit of something to check out. For Annie and many 57% supposedly, it's not. So the final film we're reviewing today is Madeline's Madeline. Annie, tell me a little bit about that film.
Right, so Madeline's Madeline is currently out on Mubi and in some very lucky cinemas, although I don't think anywhere in Scotland. It's a film written and directed by Josephine Decker. It's starring Molly Parker, Miranda July, and a newcomer, Helena Howard. And Howard plays Madeline, who is a teenage actor attending a radically experimental physical theatre company in New York, which is run by a ridiculously annoying and poncy theatre director, Evangeline, played by Molly Parker, and who also reminds me very much of some people actually know in Edinburgh and in the field of arts. And so Madeline is a talented actor, but she suffers from mental illness and is in a very vulnerable moment and place in her life. She's hitting the most critical teenage years. And Evangeline, in her selfishness and lack of original expression, I think, encourages Madeline to weave her personal life, such as the struggles with the mother and her experiences, into the collective art piece that they're rehearsing. Of course, that's a horrible idea, especially with someone who has already difficulties dealing with the borders between imagination and reality. So what emerges from this is essentially an exploration of themes such as race, identity, cultural appropriation, and exploitation. And the description I read from it before the screening deemed it as somewhat of a masterpiece of contemporary experimental filmmaking. And everyone in the studio probably knows experimental filmmaking is not my piece of cake at all. But I do have to say I was surprised of how much I actually enjoyed it. I really, really liked it. And big part of it is because I saw it in a cinema. So this is a bit stupid to say now because it's not being screened anywhere in Scotland in cinemas. But that really played a big part in it. Also, when I was in Finland, I studied in a upper secondary school of performing arts, and it really hit the nail on the head in all the aspects about the cringiness of physical theatre and the pretentiousness occasionally of like student theatre and amateur theatre. But also, it was funny at times, but it kind of carried the heft and the weight necessary when it dealt with mental health issues, and he dealt with them really, really well. So this is a really good exploration on how a person, especially a young person, like struggling puberty, I don't know if you can say struggling, but going through puberty and going through mental health issues, how they feel. And the film is kind of portrayed that aspect of it really, really well. The relationship as well with the teenage girl and the mother was amazingly done as well. And then there is a moment, so this is the part where I said it's amazing to see in the theatre. So there's a moment where Madeline is hearing voices. And like what I've read and what I've known from films I've watched, documentaries and stuff, when you hear voices, it's just not really voices in your head. It's voices around you. So it's technically like somebody is talking to you. There's a lot of voices talking to you around you. And the way they did this in the film is they used the whole kind of scale of sound design. So in cinemas, you can have that Dolby 5.1, whatever digital audio you have, to have voices and sounds come from the front, from the middle, and from the back. And they seem, some of them are a bit further away from you, some of them are a bit closer to you. And it used the whole scale. So the screen goes black in one point, and these sounds emerge. And me and Amanda saw it in a cinema in London, and there was a woman in front of us who would just like, when that happened, she just like turned around and shush. us because she really thought there was people around her talking. It was such a realistic experience, and to me it was amazing. It distanced me from the film a bit because I was so surprised of it happening, but it was also a thing where like I smiled through it, not because it was a funny part, but because it was an experience that I haven't had in a while in the cinema. So it was like that kind of whole experience made it maybe a bit better than what it might be on a small screen. So it's really pity that it's only available in Scotland through the online platform, but I think it's still a really, really good film, and it deals with this subject really, really nicely.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I saw it in the cinema as well, and I feel like, it was so, again, going back to this atmospheric thing, is the way that you share emotions on screen and how you film it, and I think the sound was really, really compelling. I also think the whole experimental theater thing in New York was quite funny in some aspects, because I have seen enough experimental theater and performance art to not to laugh at it, and also as you said, the mother, Miranda July, she's actually a really well-known performance artist and director herself. I think Me, You, and Everyone You Know or something is the film she made I didn't like much, but I find her acting to be really great, and her role in this was particularly really, really interesting.
So I'm just going to add to the chorus here, basically, and say that it's a really good film. It took me a while to find its rhythm. Now, part of that is probably my own prejudices towards Miranda July, to be honest, because the last film I saw Miranda July in was the one she directed, called The Future, where she also voices a anthropomorphized cat. And this film opens with Madeline making kind of cat noise, because this is kind of the character she kind of retreats into. Featured cat noises on Miranda July, so my immediate reaction was, oh God, not again. But fortunately it worked out to be a lot better than that. And I think it really is a superbly made film. Again, I think like all the films we've spoken about today, it has a lot going on. What I find interesting, I would have liked to have seen this in a cinema, but I think it's well enough made that things do come through, even if you're watching it on a smaller screen or movie. Because it's funny that Annie, you and Amanda talk about the sound, because I'm looking through my notes here, and I actually have several notes that kind of make sure to highlight the sound design, because it's really, really fantastic. And like you've got that example there, but it's even the choices that have been made to soundtrack it. Like there's quite a lot of kind of like human percussion, people clicking and breathing and like making noises to kind of create atmosphere. And it's quite disturbing in a way, but it kind of really puts you there. And the sort of experiences that Madeline goes through, fortunately I've not gone through anything like that myself, but it does really get across that experience very well. It really does place you with her very effectively, and you have sympathy for her and various other characters, and also her mother. Her mother's very overbearing and is not necessarily presented very well, but you can see where that concern is coming from. And then things that are done with the visuals, in terms of they have it, it's very blurry in certain points when we're talking about Madeline's dreams. It is a very offbeat film. It does use a lot of very experimental techniques, but what is fantastic about it is all serving the characters in the film. It is serving us understanding Madeline, getting into her head, and kind of the reaction to the people around her. And there's a lot of other themes that we might talk about in a moment, but it's really a superbly made film. It took me a while to find its rhythm, but once you find that rhythm, you're really with it for the duration.
Yeah, it's very well made, and why I always pay a lot of attention in cinema is the acting. And Helena Howard, who's a newcomer, this is her debut. She's absolutely amazing. She's so spot on. She's really someone to look forward in the future, definitely.
Yeah, I really liked it too. I think, like you, Jim, I was kind of the first 10 minutes where you kind of have to settle into its sort of Vincent Gallo, Shane Carruth style of representing the actors, where it's like awkward pauses and like giggles and the camera not really knowing where to focus and finding lips or ears interesting. But once you settle into that, like, I think I really liked it. And I think you like the themes that you brought up in your intro was like, there was identity, there was race and stuff like that. But it's like some of the stuff near the end with like that theater company was, I thought, really interesting. Like in terms of there's a concept that Molly Parker's, the Evangeline character, mentions, just like immersive theater. So this I've been fascinated by this idea that you can only have a play when it's being performed. So there's improv going on where it's like no matter how much you rehearse, it's like you have to create the world of the play as it's happening, and that's what happens in the end. And that's how, spoilers, the main character sort of consolidates her own identity, is by consolidating her own power as a character in this theater group. I don't know if you agree, but
No, you would have done very well in my upper secondary school of performing arts.
awesome.
Okay, we're joined with the team behind CinemaAttic, Alberto and Rafael. Thank you guys so much for coming today.
Thank you for having us, Amanda.
Okay, tell me a little bit about CinemaAttic and how it all began. You've been around for about 10 years, right?
That's right. Just as a bit of linking, we were listening just Minor Drag by Fats Water, which was the song we were saying, but we both have some background, and we used to do radio back in the day.
Oh, wow.
So it was like a nice bridge. I used to do a radio magazine called Calamari Union, inspired by, Aki Kaurismäki's Calamari Union. And I think that is a lot of what we're going to talk in the next half an hour or so about our idea of films that matters, the kind of films we stand for, that normally have elements of absurd, have political elements in the form and in the subject, and there's an element of almost cabaret or circus in what we do. But in terms of how everything started very spontaneously, in an attic.
Yes, well, the CinemaAttic started with a different crew many years ago. I used to have my own cine club called Todos al Cine, the last Thursday of every month. And, well, I met them, we did something together. Eventually, Carlos decided to go back to Spain, and that team started to dismantle. So, well, we took over slowly, about 6 years ago, maybe, and decided to give it a bit more continuity, more regularity, rather be there every month, be there in more places, and do bigger, more events. So, well, that was our course, that was our scene, and that's where we are right now.
Exactly. And I think those elements that started CinemaAttic back in the day, which is the way cinema started, like people gathering in the back of a bar, like the Lumiere brothers and everything, that's there. The social element is very present in our film nights. Is highly important for us, that social component. And we try to bring, I'll say, films that very rarely find UK distribution, films that matter. Sometimes are like festival hits. Some are just films that we don't understand why don't have a UK distribution, and we breach, or we try to fill that.
Well, we don't trust the opinion of many festivals. We have our own. And for definite, we put films that provoke a thought, a conversation, so people are not left idle. They need to talk to the person next to them and discuss the subjects of the film, and we fancy ourselves as making a better world than doing that.
And I guess it's time to touch on the short film element, because obviously we're well known for being, like the short film guys, in a way, or the Spanish short film nights, and that was at the beginning. We strongly advocate storytelling in all forms, all lengths, but we're particularly keen with short film, and we stand for the originality and the value of short film as an original art form. We do short film nights every month. That's what we're well known for, but we love cinema, so particularly in the last 2 years we've been more fluid with this idea of nationalities, lengths. We like independent films. We know a little bit more about those coming from...
Well, something that regulars of Cinematic know about us. Alberto likes talking a lot more than I do. So I'm prepared for that. Short film is the beginning of everything. The beginning of cinema is a 12-minute track, cartridge, better said, in a camera, no editing suite, nothing. Just press play, pause it, continue, and finish it. And I think short film has still all the magic, all the mystery, and all the resource, the gaps it leaves in the narrative timeline that needs to be filled by the audience individually, but whatever each spectator comes to the cinema with in their head. So it's a magic format, and we certainly love it, and we will never give it up.
You guys do so many different kinds of events, but a lot of it revolves around this pop-up sort of, music and food, and there's this energy there I love every time I go. Talk a little bit about your philosophy in that way.
Yeah, and I guess it's back to that. I think Rafa and I are very different. We have different ideas of maybe what we want to do with Cinematic, but there is something very, very organic in the base, in the grounds that I think we share. We're all about people. Maybe quoting Agnès Varda. We're driven. We're focused in people. We like people. We like to meet people. We like the human connections that can happen around films, and we do it for a feeling. We're well known, or maybe we won't be the most successful business model, but we do it, and what we try to build with those nights is get a special atmosphere, a special feeling that night. So yeah, we put some food together.
The reality is, there's only one microphone for Alberto and me in this studio, so this is gonna get hot. No, the truth is, putting the word cinematic and business model together is like trying to put a couple of guns to a figure of. Let's not go to the church, but yes, it doesn't work. One of the driving forces in cinematic, or something that keeps us going, is the lack of good, or the very few good films, in our opinion, that are shown in commercial cinemas. The few independent cinemas have turned into a kind of elite intellectual corners where many people feel alienated. So those who like cinema don't go to those places because they feel out of place, and that's an outcry. So Cinematic really goes to them, really doesn't have any problem turning up in a derelict basement, in a church hall, in a library, anywhere, setting up our gear and giving a very good or the best cinema experience we can offer. And yes, food, music, talking, comedy, and good films are always part of the ingredients.
A lot of comedy, People start some people said, we should do a break between the intro and the films because it's becoming so long. It's becoming a good excuse for Rafa and I to improvise our stand-up comedy for the next fringe.
That wasn't in the plan.
No, but back to the question, Amanda. Absolutely. There is an element of us promoting films that could be considered niche or independent or authorial, auteur films, and bringing that in a very popular way for the people, not just for film buzz, or film freaks. We like to show these films to a wider audience, to not necessarily film critics. And normally to do that, or to connect, or just to survive, really, and to get enough people to keep paying the bills and everything, you need to be a bit creative. So we've been mixing that. We've been trying to sell the experience, build a kind of social night where film is the center, but there are other elements. So people often come, or some people might have come to have Estrella Galicia because they don't have many places where they can have, a beer like that.
Or a Cruz Campo.
Well, we don't do Cruz Campo and we won't ever do it. but a lot of people came because of that, because it's maybe fun, or they like the social element, and discover short films, never exposed to a short film night before. And that's something that we're particularly proud of, bringing short film and independent films to a wider audience that normally will.
It's amazing that short films are really, really popular, and I think it gets, because you don't know what you're about to see, and so you're really trusting of your programmer like CinemaAttic to give you something, and I think they sell out a lot, They're quite popular, right?
Yes. Well, there's one thing as well that is helping us. And it's what used to be a cultural movement where people going out and there will be so much culture outside, and it wasn't so much business driven. Now it's turning to a kind of a entertainment industry. And most people doesn't want to be part of it, so mostly because you are at the wrong end of that industry, at the paying end. So when there are, obviously not only CinemaAttic, but there are so many organizations programming different events, programming events where every single member of the public counts. Everybody feels great, everybody likes to be part of it, and everybody likes to try something new. So I think we just create the right atmosphere, the right tone, the right line on business model again. And people feel comfortable and happy and proud of being part of something like CinemaAttic.
So you started in Edinburgh, but you also you're now in Glasgow and Manchester. Is there any difference you think about the audiences in different cities, like how they respond to the films that you program?
There is. To put it in context, like we would never thought this will turn into this, no? We were just, and when we started, you will go to Edinburgh Film Festival or tell people in the industry, hey, we do a Spanish short film night once a month, and everyone will be like, good luck with that, Let's see in 3 months if you still exist. And for instance, on Friday, we were doing a great collaboration in the Portrait Gallery with the guys of Nuriki, responding to the Warhol and Paolozzi exhibition. But at the same time, simultaneously, Rafa was there. I was doing a quite activist and political night, showing the documentary Las Sandinistas and contextualizing the current crisis happening in Nicaragua. And it was a sellout event in Lauriston Hall in Edinburgh as well. But then we were in London as well with our Basque Spring, with the team there in Stour Space in Hackney. So it's becoming that kind of, movement that we wanted it to be. We're quite cautious about making it sustainable in a way, because there is a lot of heat now coming from Bristol, for instance, a city that we think the format and the ethos fits perfectly, and they match, and all the elements. Normally we look at a team that can do and share the philosophy that we have, some links with the uni or with film studies, and a good venue. And obviously I think we found that. So for instance, Bristol should be starting after summer. Rafa's going this week to Manchester and Leeds as well.
Yes.
So it's taking all over UK, really.
Well, that Friday, as Alberto said, it was a great night, and having free CinemaAttic events at the same time, different locations, was a great feeling. And Saturday in Glasgow as well. So we are actively looking for the right people to open the CinemaAttic formula everywhere else. And it doesn't matter really if it's a great city like Bristol, or if it's a university somewhere in the middle of nowhere, or we don't care, but we would love people to dare to participate, and we certainly support them all the way.
Great. So tell me a little bit about, you had a really big spring, the Basque Spring. Tell me a little bit about that, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the future events you're doing.
Yeah. Normally, or in the last couple of years, we've been mixing, because normally we will be a short film, a monthly short film night. So every month we will come with a different proposal. Right. But in the last 2 years, we've been mixing that, stretching to see how much we can handle with retrospectives that can last a week, 10 days. And we thought that focusing in some of those peripheral cinema, or some of those regions, could have a value, and presenting Basque films that not many people might be aware that there are films filmed in Basque, made in Basque Country, will be there will be a value in that. So we try to bring the resources from private means, public institutions. This project, for instance, was waiting to happen for a couple of years. We tried to present it through 3 generations of Basque filmmakers, and we started pitching this last year to GFT, for instance, and this year we found the resources to do it. It happens that we have plenty of mad ideas and projects, roller disco screenings, political festivals,
they'll do it before we do it.
Outcast festivals, and particular projects, and they wait until the resources are there. So in the case of the Basque Spring, it become like we managed to get dates in several cities in UK. We had a lot of films that we wanted to share with the audience, and most of them were also have a dialogue between them, because they were touching in how violence has been affecting Basque society and filmmakers portraying that. And particularly, I think there is a very interesting relationship between landscape, language, tradition, and how Basque filmmakers use that tradition to renovate and to innovate. So we've been showing those films here in Edinburgh, in Glasgow, a mixture of GFT and traditional cinemas, or art house cinemas, and pop-ups, culinary screenings. We were doing, even we were transforming Leith for a day in the old town of Bilbao, doing a Sunday of pinches and film. So it was a beautiful project to do, and it's finishing this week in Leeds and Manchester.
The truth is, Basque society are not affected by big issues that don't affect anybody else. It's more interesting the way they approach them. Alberto talks about the connection with the nature. Sometimes it's the disconnection, the progressive disconnection we are suffering all with nature. The solitude for society, the discrimination, some big issues that affect us all globally. But it's very interesting to see how a particular group of people, in this case was all the Basque people, looks into those issues and how they portray them. I think it's refreshing, and it helps alien people from that society to realize the problem can be sorted, or can be shared, or can be discussed. And that's probably the underlining driver in all these events.
So, you're not a festival, you're more of a like a continual, club of sorts. How do you like, what's the benefits of that, and how with your audience and with what you can do and with that,
Amanda, we are a Waco cinema. A Waco cinema is a cinema with no walls, no postal address. But we will end up at this rhythm. We will end up having a regular program almost every day of the year.
Yeah.
In different places with different formats. Hopefully more appealing than current cinemas. The numbers are still going down, and I can tell that other platforms in Edinburgh, at least, New Ricky, CinemaAttic, Cinetopia, and a few others are getting more audience through the door than regular cinema. So probably we are getting to the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're experimenting definitely with, or if we have maybe an interesting element, is that kind of audience engagement proposal, which is terrible for a business plan, as we're saying again, but it's a commitment to experiment and to see how that affects and how it fits, showing those films every month, changing. Sometimes our theme-focused programs, sometimes they are region-focused, Basque or Chilean or Brazilian. But it's definitely interesting, and we're very aware of that cabaret, of that circus element, of not being easy to be identified. Is the flexibility that we like, that we're a movement. We have our own agenda of events, but it allows us also to be very flexible and go and team up with Nuriki, or Take One Action, or the Jazz Festival that came from a commission last year. So we quite like that element as well. It's been happening in the last couple of years. We put an agenda. It's been a long-term process. We brought the films that we show. That is, in a way, our mission statement, and people started to come and say, hey, we like what you do, and maybe we like the idea of CinemaAttic as a movement, as a space where people can come, experiment, program films, come with projects. So yeah, we have our own agenda every month. We welcome retrospectives, and we also collaborate with a lot of people.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the collaboration, because I saw every time I go back on your site, I see all these different organizations you're collaborating with. And eventually we'll be collaborating with Scalarama as well, So.
Exactly. Yes, Scalarama. I forgot about Morbid, sorry.
But yeah, so I mean, what benefits, again, is working with different other organizations like Leith Late and Noiriki to what you do?
I think cinema in general is a very a collective endeavor, no? And it's made with people, and often you see that, and then there is an element of networking between the professionals that like to share those experiences, and it's back to that kind of defense of sharing films with people that we have. There is an obvious benefit from doing event or delivering with Leaflet, which is, sharing that vibe, that feeling that we can construct with others. Sometimes, there are also economic benefits, sharing fees, sharing efforts, sharing resources. But overall, I think towards, in general, not just in the cinema industry, we go towards individualism. We need to reclaim that collaborative aspect, that social element, and we're very aware of it. And we sacrifice maybe resources, time, money to go and to do collaborations with other people.
Yes, well, I don't have much to add to that. It's great to collaborate with people. It's great to see how other people do things. It's great to feel that actually very important festivals and organizations like Take One Action, which we used to use as a model to follow, it calls you and says, hey, how would you like to do an event together? And that was a great day, and also the event went incredibly well. We sold out in Film House and GFT, but it's not, I don't know if we would have managed to do it by ourselves. Probably, why not? But it's much better the way we did it with Tamara, and the way Almudena Carracedo, one of the directors of the film, came over and enjoyed a full aspect of what's going on here in Scotland, no? So yes, for definite, the future is in the mix, and we need to keep collaborating and working with nice people, interesting people.
That's another thing I really like. I saw some of the stuff you did with Manipulate, and there's master classes with SDI. You bring over the filmmakers, and you have Q&As, and there's so much of that kind of stuff going on. And I think that's what makes your film events even more powerful. Not always, but when you do, it's been great for me to see.
Exactly, and it's the same. It's back to resources. Yeah. 2 years ago, we did a statement, and we said, right, we want to bring this proposal to institutions. We want to connect with the Scottish film industry, with institutions here, and we want to bring the authors. We want to be the creators, the filmmakers, and we're interested in the person and in the filmmaker. We want to ask, we want to interrogate, we want to share the ideas behind the processes. And most of those events, as you know, are for free, because we can do it with ECA or with the Scottish Documentary Institute, or in Glasgow with the Uni, or with the Centre of Contemporary Arts. But it's a great element, and probably one that we don't get a lot of profit from it, but it's one of the ones that we're most proud of.
So if I laugh in the background, it's just hearing Alberto talking about business plans and profit. All of a sudden, I don't know. The truth is that this Basque Spring was made of 21 events. Out of them, 11 were for free. And there's a lot of value for in every angle you can imagine. The meeting the creator, the creative person, the creative mind behind a film before you watch the film. Or even like in this case with Anna Schultz, to watch the film before, discuss it with her, and then watch it again in a big screen. So with Carlos Santa in February, was the same. It was a pleasure to have him here. He spent so much time in the Art College talking about the structure of time and working in the workshops with the students of animation students of ECA. So those are experiences that really are worth to be lived and to bring over. They cannot be obviously measured on financial terms. It's just something that is really good to do.
Absolutely, and for us it was a way to meet our heroes in a way. Very basically, short filmmakers that nobody knows here have some prestige maybe in the festival circuit in Spain or amongst some circles, but reclaim the value of those filmmakers, bring them, let them speak about their work, and kind of review their cinematography.
I've run into you guys in some festivals as well. Do you travel a lot to different festivals to find some of these? How do you find your films that you program?
Yeah. I guess once again is a It's a not very economic way to do it, because most festivals would do a call for submissions, receive a lot of films, gather a team, and select. And we do what we start to call like the sniper style of programming, which is, we watch a lot of films in festivals. We ask, normally we are the ones that ask for screeners, for links. And when that creative connection happens, when that spark, when we say, this fantastic Brazilian film about trans moms will go really well with this Colombian film or this German co-production, I think, there are themes here that should be presented, as a body of work or as a program, and have a really good value. And then we go one by one to each sales agent or distributor and pay for the film individually, which is more costly. You spend more time, more money. But in the days, and we were talking about this earlier as well, in these days where, a lot of powers are imposing us subtly sometimes what we need to see, or, what we need to go to the cinema to watch, we think there is a value on that, on spending more time putting these films together and justifying and presenting to the audience why we put those films, and hopefully they can feel that when they they can see those connections.
So what's in store? What's up next, or certain things you are excited to think about in the summer and the fall for CinemaAttic?
Well, the first thing is that we have only one event left. Well, 2 in England, 2 in Scotland, middle of June, and then we close for 3 months just to catch up with family, relationships. My kids have every right to have a memory of their father as a young. But one thing we've been toying with the idea of certainly bringing a SCAT back. The Catalan Film Festival will come back in the early winter, I don't know, late November, early December. We were toying with the idea of a special on revolutionary left, like really revolutionary 60s spirit. And there's a few names still kicking around alive and willing to talk and to still spark a bit of a different way to live. And I think in these days we are living in Europe, I think we should do it. We should just bring it over.
I think the programs are increasingly becoming more political, not necessarily just talking about politics or social, but also in the form what we were saying before. And it's something that we're quite keen. There is an element of entertainment as well, and films that are funny, but we try to keep that balance. Sometimes this year has been a lot of region or country focused, but we're quite keen with getting back to the theme focus and bring a lot of different perspectives from different countries. The last event before the summer break is a focus on Chilean films, and there is a new wave of Chilean filmmakers, many, and we're reclaiming. It's been a particularly feminist year for us. We've been showing a lot of films made by women, and we haven't done the numbers yet, but it was around 50, 60 of the films we brought in the last year, and it's a lot of films, were directed by women, and you can see that in the case of Chile with Too Late to Die Young, for instance, by Dominga Sotomayor coming into cinemas. We're going to look at some of the earlier short films by Dominga, and again, there is that social element. There will be Chilean music, Chilean food, so it's a last party before summer, and it's a very Latin party. And then, as Rafa was saying, there are big ideas after the summer break, so there's a lot of rock and roll.
Go ahead.
No, when we talk about events as well, we are lucky that we have a team behind. The collaborations are not only with other film platforms. We, for example, work a lot with Fogón Latino, which are capable of cooking Colombian food and then Chilean food and then Nicaraguan food and then bring it to 4 different venues at once. So it's important the people behind us, all our, we call it the cinematic family. It's about 20 to 30 people who, in one way or the other, come over, give a hand. They like what we do, and completely uninterested, they turn up and work. So it's not only Alberto and me. It's a very big collective. That's probably the best of it.
And when is the Chilean event again?
14th, 15th of June, am I right?
14th in 15th of June.
Yeah. 14th Glasgow, 15th Edinburgh, if I'm wrong. It's Thursday, Friday. Don't have the calendar in front, but I think it's 14th Thursday Glasgow, 15th Edinburgh.
And how best do people find more about CinemaAttic?
We're everywhere, really. It's...
Well, find our website.
I guess.
Website, cinemaattic.com.
Yeah, cinemaattic.com, AATT, because some people might get lost just with the traditional cinematic. There's AATT, cinema that was born in an attic. And we do Facebook, we do stories in Instagram. That's a new thing, apparently, you have to do stories and live. So, yeah, we have a team that helps us with this, but we do Twitter. We're very active everywhere, so they can find us there. We're also persons, so they can jump in the street and say, hi, we like what you do.
Yeah. Can I talk about being paid a pint and talk forever about cinema? Either of us will do that.
Well, thank you both so much for coming, and we'll all hope to make it to your last summer event before the summer holiday, and then see you around
it's gonna be huge.
in September for Scalarama too. So
we already know roughly what we want to show.
Thanks again so much for coming. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Okay,
Cheers.
bye. Well, that's what we have for May at Cinetopia. Thanks to Alberto and Rafa for joining us. We look forward to catching up back next month, where we'll be reviewing more films and talking to more local film industry people. So what's on for Take One this upcoming month, Jim?
Well, the main thing, we're going to have a few articles from Cannes, hopefully, but to be honest with you, the main event will probably actually be the Edinburgh Film Festival. The programme's coming out very soon. It's going to come out on May 29th. They've announced a few events already, so I'll be having a look through that, and plenty of people going to that and checking out what's there.
And we have a couple ideas for June, Annie, right, for Cinetopia?
I guess so, Amanda. I'd like you to run these by me before I have to speak about them on the radio. But yeah, we do have some ideas. That's true. But we are also going to be spending a lot of time in Edinburgh International Film Festival, and there's also Sheffield Dogfest coming up soon. And I've actually seen some of the films that are in there. They have a really, really strong program. So if you have the means to travel to Sheffield and stay there for a few nights, it's definitely a place to check out in June.
Well, I was referring to our Pride screening at the end of June. I think that we're going to plan on doing for the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots at Leith Theatre. We're going back to quotable classics at Cinema Nights at Leith Theatre, right?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, we're probably going to do Pride for that in Leith Theatre. Yeah, that's going to be amazing.
And Luca, what do you have for blogs and writing and anything else that you want to report?
Well, apart from the Jamie Robson thing, I will be taking photos for Pride and for any other planned events that happen. I'm also excited. We were just chatting about it. There is, hopefully you guys will review it next month, but there's a new Hungarian film called Sunset coming out, which is the sophomore effort from Laszlo Nemes, who did Son of Saul, which won Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. This one's about World War I and stuff. So, yeah, happened to go to it last week with a Q&A with the director. It was effing amazing. And, yeah, hope you guys review that one.
We'll definitely keep that under consideration. Well, thank you guys so much for coming again. The Cinetopia radio show is produced by myself, Amanda Rogers, co-founder of Cinetopia and RPP Productions, and Jim Ross, managing editor of Take One magazine, a UK-based magazine, and Anni Asikainen, co-founder of Cinetopia, and Paul Bruce, the director of the Edinburgh Short Film Festival. Luka Vukos, thank you so much for your input on the films this month.
Cheers.
And for more information about Cinetopia and our partners, go to cinetopiashow.com or follow us on social media at Cinetopia Show. Thanks.